Technical analysis versus fundamental analysis. If you guys have been watching my channel for a while, you know that I love technical analysis and that a lot of what my channel is around is about the idea of looking for levels of support, resistance, supply, demand, finding areas on the chart where historically there have been some sort of tendencies or patterns that we can potentially exploit or use into the future. That's kind of the basis of technical analysis. But what about fundamental analysis? Is it something that we should be looking at? Is it something that we should use in our trading in order to actually make consistent gains? In today's video, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about what exactly technical analysis and fundamental analysis is, as well as what my thoughts are on using fundamental analysis and technical analysis, and kind of just my overall bias about these two concepts in general. Stay tuned. Let's dive into it right now. What's going on, traders? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Nick, also known as Trader Nick here on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe and like the video down below if you like this sort of content. Today, we're going to be talking all about technical analysis and fundamental analysis. What do these concepts mean, as well as how do we use each one, and should we be using both or one or the other? There's an endless debate in the world of finance that I've seen happen again and again on YouTube, on Instagram, and online forums where people are arguing whether you should be using technical analysis or whether you should be using fundamental analysis. And then there's the people who say that you should be using both. And then there's the people saying you only need one or you only need the other. So what is the real answer here? Should we be using technical analysis or should we be focused on fundamental analysis? Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be sharing, of course, my thoughts on both. You guys know me probably on this channel. If you are a subscriber, then you know that I love technical analysis, and that's primarily what I use in my own trading. Now, fundamental analysis, though, I'm not going to say is useless. And the big question a lot of times I get is, do we need fundamental analysis at all in order to actually make money in the currency market or the stock market? And my answer is that kind of depends, because the concept of using fundamental analysis is basically trying to understand the story of what is going on behind the underlying asset that you are looking at, right? So if you're looking at a currency relative to another currency, you could make a lot of decisions based off of the way price is moving. The whole idea behind technical analysis and price action is to study the way market participants are behaving in certain areas and certain zones to potentially catch the next movement that's going to happen in the market. Can you use historical stuff to try and make a prediction about what could happen next? Well, in technicals, that's what we're trying to do, but it actually might not be too much different than fundamentals. Let me break it down. Fundamental analysis is basically understanding the story or the underlying hard data, information, news, headlines, all the stuff that's going on to make the underlying currency or stock or commodity move to the up or down side. When we had the great financial crisis in 2008, there were some serious bubbles going on and some serious kind of catastrophic things that fell apart and caused a massive movement to the downside. Those were somewhat fundamental reasons behind a major crash. Sure, there was a major pump up before it. Could you have seen it all coming with technicals alone, or would you have only been able to use fundamentals? That's kind of the question that we're looking at today. Now, when it comes to using fundamental analysis, the idea behind fundamental analysis, again, is using the story of an underlying asset to try and predict what will happen next. But it's actually got some similarities to technical analysis because both of them are using historical information, data, patterns to try and make predictions about what may happen next. If you're looking at a stock and you're taking a look at that stock's earnings for the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, the idea here is that there might be some sort of pattern that maybe you make predictions on using the past data. If a company almost every single time, 9 times out of 10, goes up after earnings and you decide to place buy positions before earnings, hoping that that pattern will continue, that's a fundamental based concept that you're using the information of the past to try and make predictions about the future. Fundamental analysis and technical analysis share that concept. And to argue, in my opinion, which is better is kind of a meaningless argument. What really should matter to you is finding what works for you, what you understand best, what fits you most comfortably, and learning that and mastering that, right? Again, I mentioned the concept of trading earnings. That is a fundamental play that's very popular. A lot of people like to play earnings in the stock market, individual stocks that have earnings coming up and trying to play that. Well, in currencies, there's things like testing or looking through the historical unemployment rate numbers and trying to make predictions based off of what's happened historically. Here's another one. Another fundamental idea would be that there's seasonality sometimes in markets. For example, in the summer, there's not a lot of people buying big heavy coats. And in the winter, there's not a lot of people buying swimsuits. That's kind of a seasonality. So the stores that sell, or the companies that sell certain products, might be doing better or worse during different times of the year due to their sales. It's a very basic kind of rudimentary example, but you guys hopefully get the point. There are fundamental things that we see happening all around us that are making prices move. And so that's the concept of fundamental analysis. But let's talk a little bit about, do we need fundamental analysis in order to actually trade successfully? Well, fundamental analysis is a very interesting topic. And as you guys probably know, again, if you've watched my channel, I'm primarily a technicals person. I like to look at price action and make my decisions off of the movements that I'm seeing in the markets. But fundamental analysis is tricky because although there can be a story that you can kind of tell, one of the biggest criticisms of fundamental analysis is the idea that because you're telling a story, if you come up with a bullish thesis, you think that this stock A is going to go way up because you think that, investors are not quite recognizing the potential here and their earnings have been good, and you think that their earnings are going to come out big for whatever reason. If you have a long idea on stock A or XYZ or whatever random stock, well, the idea with fundamental analysis is that you tell yourself a story about the underlying asset in hopes that you're correct. But it doesn't give you, and this is the biggest criticism, it doesn't give you much in terms of timing. This is where, in my opinion, technicals shine, is you can look to try and time entries a little bit better with technicals. That's just my opinion though, because another example you could argue with fundamental analysis is that if you have this concept where you're trading earnings, well, that would give you a general entry time. If you bought the day before earnings and held it for 5 days after, that's kind of a fundamental timing. But sometimes you have things like long-term investing and long-term trades. If you think the euro is going to rise in the next 6 months to a year, well, your timing can be tricky because fundamentally things can change and the story can unfold and it can take time to actually unravel, right? And so you might think it's going to go up in the next 2 months, but it ends up going up in the next 2 years after going down for 6 months. So you have to think about that. That's where, in my opinion, one of the cool things is you can, in fact, combine both. So if you have a fundamental bias on the euro to go up, well, you've looked through the story, you've poured through the numbers, you've poured through unemployment rates or whatever you're looking at, interest rates, whatever you're looking at for the euro. You've poured through the numbers, you've decided, okay, I have a bullish thesis on this currency. Well, now I can use technicals to try and do that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the computer. We're going to take a look at this. I'm going to just do a little bit of drawing. We'll do a little painting on the screen here, and I'll show you guys a little bit of what I mean visually, so hopefully it resonates a little bit better. Okay, so I'm here on the chart, and you can see I've got a brilliantly written out technicals versus fundamentals here. Now, what I want you guys to know is we just mentioned the idea of combining technicals and fundamentals, and hopefully you guys gathered the idea that one is not necessarily better than the other. It's kind of comes down to preference, comes down to what you like. Now, when it comes to technicals and fundamentals, we can actually do both. So sometimes one concept that people like is the idea of combining technicals and fundamentals. So let's say that technically the market in price action form actually looks pretty bullish and fundamentals also look bullish. Well, this could actually be really cool because we could use the technicals, right? If we have a nice trending market and we also agree with the fundamentals, well, we could use this combination and say, okay, well, this plus this gives me a very bullish outline. And we're using the fundamentals as a confirmation to our technical trading, right? This means we could be looking for pullbacks, we could look for breakouts in the hopes that those underlying fundamentals might kind of help our trade along. Well, we could switch things around. What if we had technicals saying, this was bearish and fundamentals were bullish? Well, let's say that technicals are looking like this. We have this kind of downtrend. Well, if we fundamentally believe bullishly in, let's say it's the Aussie, we think the AUD is going to go, AUD is going to go up. Well, if we start to see a breakout, maybe this on the technical side, we'd be more willing to try and buy into this market because our fundamental analysis is bullish. Again, using that as kind of a confirmation. So this is how we can kind of combine both. But in terms of which one is better, I think that this is kind of up to preference. I don't think that one is better than the other. There are people who are successful both with technicals and fundamentals. But if you're asking me which one I prefer, most of my trading is going to lean more on the technical side. I do have strategies that are entirely 100% technicals, and I do have strategies that are a combination of both. And I guess you could even make the argument that I have investments that are only fundamentally based, meaning that, buying and holding long-term companies that I really like in the stock market, or buying cryptocurrency because I believe fundamentally it could go up, right? Just as an example, it's not advice or anything. It's just my personal kind of opinion. So using the fundamentals and using the technicals both has merit. It really comes down to, are you short-term? Are you long-term? Do you like fundamentals? Are they tricky and confusing to you? Do you like technicals, or are they tricky and confusing to you, right? It comes down to understanding that both have strengths, both have weaknesses, and you have to find what works for you. And trying to get it just from a YouTube video and trying to get it from somebody else to tell you exactly what you should do, to me, is kind of a waste of time, because everybody has a unique style. Everybody is comfortable with a certain way of doing things. Guys, I hope you got something out of today's video. Make sure to like the video down below. It does go a long way to help the content grow. And subscribe to the channel for more content in the future. I hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you back next time.